Parshas Yisro, and in Parshas Yisro we learned that Seres Adibris, so actually I could choose any sugya, Kol HaTorah Kulo, because all the Rishonim quote Rabbeinu Sagi Goin, that Seres Adibris are an abbreviated version of Taryag mitzvahs, and each and every one of the Taryag mitzvahs has some fundamental connection with any of the Seres Adibris. But usually, Parshas Yisro, we speak about a sugya associated with Hilchas Shabbos. Zochres Yom Shabbos lekadeshoi, lo yisase kol malacha, part of the Seres Adibris. And Hilchas Shabbos is an ocean. So today we will be discussing a very fundamental halacha, which is primarily in Hilchas Shabbos, but not only in Hilchas Shabbos. And we're dealing with the obligation, the mitzvah, to do whatever is within our power to do to avoid and prevent the need to be Machal Shabbos, even though it's a Pikuach Nefesh situation. Yes, it's Pikuach Nefesh Deiches Shabbos. But if you could minimize or prevent Chilul Shabbos and prepare whatever you can before Shabbos, you're obligated, you're mechuyev to do so. So Seres Adibris is twice in Toras Hashem and Toras Moshe. Parshas Yisro, Parshas V'Eschanan. Parshas Yisro, Zocher es Yom Shabbos lekadshoi. Parshas V'Eschanan, Shomer es Yom Shabbos lekadshoi. And Rashi brings in this week's parsha, Zocher v'shober b'dibur echod nemru. And we also find in Mechilta, Ma she'ena pe yochel adaba ve'ena oizen yochel hashmoya. B'dibur echod nemru. That is not natural, it's miraculous. So what is the significance of b'dibur echod nemru? The Netziv has an amazing chiddush twice in his great Sforim. Hemek dover parshas V'Eschanan, and Hemek Shala. Shiltas der Vachaygon Sheilta Aleph. And the Nesiv argues. Just like Zochres Yom Shabbos lekadshoi has two different meanings. On one hand, from this pasuk we learn the mitzvah to make Kiddush Hayom b'Devorim, Zochres Yom Shabbos lekadshoi. But we also find in Chazal, in Mechilta and Beit Tzedaf Tet Zayin, that the mitzvah of Zocher Yom Shabbos lekadshoi doesn't start Leil Shabbos ben Hashmoshes. All week you need to remember Shabbos. And Shammai HaZokan hayu oichel kol hayomim l'chvoid Shabbos. Whenever Shammai HaZokan saw something appealing, something beautiful, something tasty, he bought it l'koved Shabbos. And Monday, if he found something even better, then whatever he bought Sunday for Shabbos, he ate, he consumed, and what he bought Monday was l'koved Shabbos. And throughout the week, he was busy all week with Shabbos, and that is part of Zocher Yom Shabbos lekadshoi. It's not only Shabbos; it's constantly. The Netziv argues the same would go for Shomer Yom Shabbos lekadshoi. So Shomer is to abstain from doing a malacha. It is not only in Shabbos that you need to abstain from doing a malacha; it is all week. Which means you need to bear in mind all week, is there anything I could do to prevent and avoid the necessity to be Machal Shabbos? Even though when Shabbos comes, it might be Pikuach Nefesh. So then it's a Gavaldige Chiddush. Not the halacha. The halacha is accepted halacha. And that's a topic we will be discussing at length. What is a Chiddush is the drash. According to the Netziv, it's a diurais, it's the posuk. But I think the comparison between Zohar and Shomer is not very convincing. Zohar and Shomer, by the very nature of the mitzvah, are two different concepts, and they're not the same. So Zohar, first of all, means making Kiddush. You can't make Kiddush until it's Shabbos, or till you're Mekabel Shabbos, to Sefer Shabbos. That's a separate discussion, it's not what we're talking about today. But Zohar might have an additional interpretation, which means Kipshutoi Shel Mikra. Remember Shabbos. You could remember Shabbos all week. But Shomer is observe Shabbos. You cannot observe Shabbos until Shabbos comes. So this is a big stretch and a big chiddush. You cannot observe Shabbos. Shomer means menias asiyas malacha, to abstain from doing a malacha. You can't abstain from doing a malacha until Shabbos is here. The Mechilta clearly says, Zocher es Yom Shabbos lekadshoy ad shaloi tovoi, Shomer es Yom Shabbos mishetovoi. So the very Mechilta, which teaches us the concept of Zocher es Yom Shabbos all week round, clearly stresses the difference between Zocher and Shomer. They're not the same. Zocher es Yom Shabbos mishetovoi, mishaloi tovoi, ad shaloi tovoi, Shomer es Yom Shabbos lekadshoy mishetovoi. So the drash of the Netziv, original, maybe a spark of genius, but I don't think it's nochen la'aloch. I don't think it's right. But let's talk about the etzem halacha. Is a person obliged to do whatever he can erev Shabbos to prevent Chilul Shabbos, and to what extent? How much effort? How much pain? How much monetary loss? Does he need to invest to prevent a situation in which Pikuach Nefesh will be Deicha Shabbos? Tshuvas Chasam Soifa Shin Lamed Ches Yoredeya. And the Chasam Soifa touches upon a topic which is sometimes troubling and painful, but it's an important halacha. So I've been asked hundreds of times by youngsters that want to be part of the Hatzalah organization, Kohanim. Could a Kohen volunteer to be a paramedic? When he knows in advance that to our dismay, he will be exposing himself to Tumas Meis. Not all the people we try to save will be saved. Some of them, to our dismay, will be beyond the point of return. And every Hatzalah member knows that sometimes you will arrive at the scene, it's going to be too late. You're going to try to resuscitate and you will not be successful. And you will be exposing yourself to Tumas Meis. Is that permissible? And the same question comes from young people that want to be doctors. To become a doctor, you need to learn anatomy. And in most medical installations in the world, you need to touch and engage with cadavers, with the bodies of the deceased. And that is Tumas Meis. So my psak is this: if you're living in a far away place and where there are not enough members, and your participation, your being part of Hatzalah, is a direct lifesaver, then Pikuach Nefesh overrides every other consideration, every other mitzvah. But in most communities, Jewish communities in the world, we know how important Hatzalah is. In some countries, primarily third world countries, you cannot rely at all on the general services, on the Red Cross or whatever it is. But even in the more modern countries, in Western countries, where the medical services are relatively good, but it is clear that Hatzalah is a lifesaver. I think thousands of Jews throughout the world owe their lives to Hatzalah organizations, to the various different branches. But if there are enough volunteers and your own personal being part of the group is not really Pikuach Nefesh, then I don't think a Kohen should volunteer. Same, learning medicine. And that's the Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer deals with the Kohen taking calls to save lives. And the Chasam Sofer says, well, if the Kohen is a paramedic, he is a doctor, and he gets a call, everybody needs to rush to the scene. That's halacha pshuta. But if the question is, could I become a doctor? The Chasam Sofer says no. And the Chasam Sofer writes, Kivederach Agav, aren't we obliged to do everything we could do for a yoledes, for a chodesh yesh b'sakona, for mila bizmana? Don't we have to do everything erev Shabbos to prevent and minimize Chilul Shabbos? So if we actively need to engage and initiate preparing things erev Shabbos to prevent Chilul Shabbos, it would go without saying, milta de pshita, that you cannot do things before Shabbos that would necessitate Chilul Shabbos. Kal v'chomer. The same goes for a Kohen regarding Tumas Kohanim. Source number 1. Source number 2. Mishnah Berurah Sha'atzion, Shin Mem Dalet Siv Koten Tes. The Mishnah Brura writes, a young Jewish person, soldier in the Russian army, and he got a command, he got an assignment. Shabbos 12 o'clock in the afternoon, the assignment must be fulfilled. You got to build something or do whatever it is. That boy, that soldier, needs to do every effort to try to fulfill the assignment before Shabbos. So even though we assume in the Russian army, unlike the Israeli army, they had no regard for Shabbos, and if a Jewish boy didn't fulfill his duty, his life was in jeopardy. His life was in danger. So when you read this Sharatzian, it's sad. It's sad to remember how Golus was. And it's an opportunity to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that things are different today. So the Mishnah Berurah writes, if a soldier got a command from HaMemshola HaRoimeima, HaMemshola HaRoimeima, our highly esteemed government. Who was that Memshola Roimeima? Yamach Shemam Vezicham, the Russian army. They snatched Jewish boys off the street violently and conscripted them into the army for 30 years. Those were the Kantonistim. A sad period in modern Jewish history. Those are the Shoim, but that's Golus. And the Mishnah Berurah needs to write HaMemshola HaRoimeima, our wonderful and highly esteemed government. Well, at least in our country, things are different. So, the Mishnah Berurah writes, a young Jewish soldier is obliged, he's mechuyev, to make every effort, to do whatever he could do out of Shabbos, in order to prevent the need to be Machal Shabbos tomorrow. So this halacha is a poshet halacha. Source number 3 is somewhat more complicated. Mogan Avrom Shin Lamed Siv Kot Nalef. Shin Lamed is Dina Yoledes. So the Mogan Avrom writes, when a woman gets into the 9th month of pregnancy, and she might have a baby on Shabbos, and that will necessitate Chilul Shabbos, everything should be prepared Erev Shabbos to prevent the need to be Mechal Shabbos tomorrow, if she'll need to give birth tomorrow. The source of this halacha, the Mogan Avrom quotes from the Sefer Hasidim, Tov Tov Nun Hey. So this seems to be source number 2, similar to source number 1. Source number 3, similar to 1 and 2. When the Mishnah Berurah brings these halacha, Shin Lamed Siv Kot Nalef, the Mishnah Berurah writes, Min hara'ui isha nechneses l'chodesh hatshi, to prepare everything out of Shabbos. So the lesson of the Mishnah Berurah clearly indicates it's not a chiyuv. It is the right thing to do. Min hara'ui, loosely translated, is it is fitting. When a woman is in the 9th month to her pregnancy, she should prepare everything out of Shabbos, which is not a chiyuv. Then the Aruch HaShulchan comes along, and his lotion is Chasidim v'anshei mas and noagim, to prepare everything out of Shabbos. So this halacha gets watered down from the Mogan to the Mishnah Berurah, from the Mishnah Berurah to Aruch HaShulchan. Chasidim v'anshei mas. Why isn't it a chiyuv? What is the difference between a Yaledes and that young Jewish soldier in the Russian army? I think the answer is a very simple one. The young Jewish soldier got a command. He has a duty to fulfill. And that is a vadai. It's not a suffix. And therefore he has a chiyuv to do it on Erev Shabbos. 9th month of pregnancy, after all, Shabbos is only one of 7 days. So the statistical likelihood that there will be a need to be Mechal Shabbos is quite low. 1 out of 7. And therefore we can't say there's a chiyuv to do things out of Shabbos. You might need to be Mechal Shabbos. For a suffix, that is not a chiyuv. Min hara'ui, that is what Chasidim v'Anshei Ma'aseh do. It's the right thing to do. However, it is in no way a chiyuv. So what happens in a situation? And I want to share with you 2 psukim that I gave. Both are associated with a woman that is going to have a child. Minchas Rosh Hashanah Simachov Hey in Shalat Teshuvah is an interesting tshuva. And I remember the background to the tshuva. It was somewhat a quarrel, not a machlokes, between husband and wife. So the wife is in the 9th month of pregnancy, and she wants to have the baby in Shari Tzedek, and her husband was busy every Erev Shabbos calling whomever he knew, his friends, his relatives, his family, even distant family. Could you have me for Shabbos? All the people he knew in Bayit Vegan, if she would need to get to the hospital on Shabbos, it should be walking distance. They shouldn't need to take a car. And the wife was annoyed. You're a burden on people, and it's a burden on me. We have kids, arranging the house, packing up, and moving in with a family that is not very excited to have us. They didn't offer. You're burdening yourself and other people. And the husband says, but it's a chiyuv, the Mogen Avraham writes. And on my tshuva, I quoted the Aruch Shulchan, I quoted the Mishnah Berurah, and I explained, no. If possible. But that doesn't justify driving your wife crazy and burdening the kids and burdening people who didn't go out of their way to have you. You're just begging them to let you in. That is far beyond the chiyuv of Chasidim Yan Shemasa, of what is min hara'ui. But let's speak about a different situation. A woman at the end of her pregnancy already has labor. She went into labor Friday afternoon, an hour and a half before Shabbos. She knows from her experience she still has a few hours to wait. If it would be in the middle of the week, she would just be comfortable at home, wait another 2 or 3 hours, and she has enough time to go to the hospital. But instead of Shabbos afternoon, does she need to go earlier to the hospital to prevent the need to drive to the hospital, to prevent Chilul Shabbos? And in this situation, it's no longer a suffix. She has labor, pain, and she knows what it is. So it's quite clear, in the next 5 or 6 hours, she will have the baby. But she still has time, and she knows she'll get to the hospital. They'll tell her, sit outside, take a walk, go fly a kite for the next 2 hours, and come back. She knows that. And in my opinion, she does not need to go to the hospital before Shabbos. She should wait at home, just like she would do any other day of the week, until she really feels she needs to go to the hospital. And that is somewhat of a chiddush, and I will explain my approach. What is the source of the chiyuv to initiate, to do things before Shabbos to prevent Chilul Shabbos, if at the end of the day the Chilul Shabbos will be justified for Pikuach Nefesh? What is the source of the halacha we quoted from the Sha'ar Tziyun, from the Chassam Sofer? I rejected the Netziv. I don't think the source is Shomras Yom Shabbos Lakatshay. Shomras Yom Shabbos Lakatshay is only Shabbos and not before Shabbos. To me, it is clear this is Ratzoin HaTorah. Svara Pshuta. Chacham Leiv Yikach Mitzvahs. Rotzo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Zak Yisrael Lefichach Yirba Lahem Torah v'Mitzvahs. Every mitzvah is a gem. Every mitzvah is a gift. And just like a person needs to make every effort before Pesach Tram to have matzahs, he needs to bake matzahs. He should be able to be Mekayim Be'erev Teichel matzahs. He needs to build a sukkah. He needs to buy a lulav and an esrog to be Mekayim these mitzvahs. So, what is the chiyuv to prepare tzarchei mitzvah before Sukkot comes? Is that the mitzvah of Sukkah? Or the mitzvah of Sukkah starts Tzei Sakei Chovim Beleil Rishon Shel Chag? The mitzvah be'erev Teichel matzahs is not before Pesach, it's Pesach by night. So what is my chiyuv to buy matzahs or to bake matzahs? Is that the etzem chiyuv of my mitzvahs to say? I don't think so. Be'erev Teichel matzahs starts Leil Aleph Shel Chag HaMatzos. Sukkot stage Yeshua starts Tzei Sakei Chovim Beleil Sukkos. V'lakachtem lechem is Alois HaShachar, first day of Sukkot. It's a svara pshuta. If you need to be Mekayim mitzvahs, you need to do whatever it takes to be able to be Mekayim mitzvahs. And if the Gemara in Menachos Mamalav says, Be'idne deritcha and shisu ha-mitzvahs say, in a moment of wrath, person will be punished that he doesn't wear tzitzis. He's not wearing dalat kamfis. He's potter min tzitzis. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is angry, you're potter. But why didn't you do whatever you can to put yourself into chiyuv? This is for your benefit. This is everything. This is Chai Olam Haba. Didn't you care? Kal v'chayme that a person is mechuyev to do whatever it takes to perform the mitzvahs that are a chiyuv, unlike tzitzis. So the necessity, the need, the chiyuv, to buy wine for Kedusha v'Lavdalta, to bake matzahs for matzah, to build a sukkah for sukkahs. That's a svara pshuta. If these mitzvahs are a chiyuv, it's rotzen HaTorah. The same svara obligates us to initiate and do whatever we can to prevent Chilul Shabbos. It's not exactly the same. And the level of chiyuv to buy matzahs and a lulav is far greater than the level of chiyuv to prevent Chilul Shabbos, that's Pikuach Nefesh, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a Pikuach Nefesh situation. But b'shoresh dvorim, it's all the same. It is all the same. And mitzvahs aseh are similar to mitzvahs lo ta'aseh. Mitzvah chiyuvi are similar to mitzvahs kiyumiyos. The levels of chiyuv are different, but fundamentally, it all boils down to a svara pshuta, which is rotzen HaTorah. Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us mitzvahs, we should be mekayim those mitzvahs and do whatever it takes to do those mitzvahs b'shleimus, whether it's a mitzvah say or a lav. And even though Pikuach Nefesh Deicha Shabbos, and it doesn't matter whether it's sutra or dechuya, you still need to do everything you can to prevent Chilul Shabbos, even though it would be a Pikuach Nefesh situation. Ein mafligen besvina, Mishnah Shabbos Daf Yutes. And there are different Perushim Rishonim. What is the Issa? 3 days before Shabbos, ein mafligen besvina. The Baal HaMaor says, because usually there's a need to be Mechana Shabbos when you're in the middle of the sea. Well, things have changed. I know many people that go for cruises, and there's no need to be Mechana Shabbos. The guys running the ship, running the boat, they take care of it. But in days of yore, it was very likely you're going to be out there on the sea, out there in the ocean, on the river, you're going to need to be Mechana Shabbos. And therefore, Gimel Yom Lefnei Shabbos, the Baal HaMaor writes, Nera kemas nera Chalalas Shabbos. So from that sugya we learn that a person is not allowed to do things before Shabbos that will cause and necessitate Chilul Shabbos. And that is far more pashut and simple than the chiyuv to go out of your way and to try to prevent an existing situation of Pikuach Nefesh. So why is ein maflig mesvin only give me Yom Lefnei Shabbos? And how about from Sunday? So obviously this is not a chiyuv gomel. If it would be an aveira, what's the difference whether it's Gimel Yom Lefnei Shabbos or before? The concept of Gimel Yom Lefnei Shabbos we find also by Havdalah. You could only make Havdalah if you skip Motzei Shabbos the first 3 days, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. 3 days at the beginning of the week belong to the past Shabbos. The other 3 days at the end of the week belong to the coming Shabbos. And that is ein mafligim esvina Gimel Yomim. The Birkei Yosef explains, and I brought it in my Sefer, Mechasor Torah, the new edition. In days of yore, it was a total necessity to travel on the oceans and the rivers. Just a historical fact. Before people invented vehicles driven by gas or oil or whatever it is, and the very first means of transportation were the trains, many years before Henry Ford developed the first Model T vehicle, there were trains. But before the trains, the major means of transportation were the rivers, waters. When the only means of transportation on land were animals, how much could one horse carry, or a mule, or an ox? But having those rafts on rivers It's almost limitless. All the major cities in the world are built on rivers. New York on the Hudson, and London on the Thames, and Paris, and Berlin. All the major cities in the world are built on rivers, besides Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. Angels built Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is everything Lamalad Melech HaTeva. So, the Nemuchas explains, it's a Gzeira Shein Rav Tzibur Yochel Lamed Bo. Chazal couldn't say, Ein Mafligim Esvena forever, because it was so commonplace and so necessary to travel. That was the major means of travel, the major means of commerce. And that's why they only asked at Gimel Yom Lefnei Shabbos. And even Gimel Yom B'tzorich Mitzvah Mutar. And this proves it's not a Chiyuv Gomer. If it would be an Aveira, they wouldn't say that Tzorich Mitzvah is Mutar. If it would be an Aveira, it would be from the beginning of the week. So, even this is Rotzoin HaTorah. And I explained many times in my Sforim, Rotzoin HaTorah has its limitations. Not in every situation. There's another similar sugya. Ishtape chamimei erevin samach zayin amid beis. In days of yore, it was accepted that after circumcision, after Mili, you need to wash the baby, to rinse the baby in hot water. So they always boiled water Erev Shabbos to have hot water, not for your coffee and your tea, but for Milas Habein. What happened Shabbos in the morning? By mistake, the entire urn of hot water was spilled out. We have no hot water. What do we do with the child with a Mila? The Balamor says, postpone the Mila to Sunday. Because it's putting the child's life in jeopardy if you don't have hot water. And you can't boil water, you can't cook water because it's Chilul Shabbos. The Ramban disagrees, and the Ramban says, Mila Bizman is a chiyuv. If it's a chiyuv, it's Doicha Shabbos, you need to be mal. And after Mila, it's Pikuach Nefesh. Pikuach Nefesh Doicha Shabbos. So the Ramban and the Balamor actually have an argument. Is it justified? Is it permitted to do something that will necessitate Chilul Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh? Is that the same as Ema Fligim V'Svena? No. Yesh Lachalak Lakan Ulachan. Maybe the Ramban is only lenient by Mila because Mila is a mitzvah chiyuvis. It's a chiyuv upon us. And therefore you need to do Mila, even though it will cause Chilul Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh. But if there's no chiyuv, the Ramban would agree. Ema Fligim V'Svena. On the other hand, when the hot water was spilled, you're doing something on Shabbos that will necessitate Chilul Shabbos. And maybe that's Chomer Tvei, than doing something Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday that will necessitate Chilul Shabbos. And therefore, the story of Ishtape Chamimei, when the water was spilled, maybe it's Chomer Tvei, maybe it's Kilo Tvei. But fundamentally, these two sugis have something in common. The question, could we do something that will necessitate and create a situation of Pikuach Nefesh to override Shabbos? So we actually touched upon three different sugis. But the way I see it, it all boils down to the same principle. The chiyuv to do and prepare whatever you need to be Mekayim a mitzvah when time of that mitzvah comes. The prohibition to do anything that will cause a necessity to be Mechal Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh. And the halacha we started off with is not only are you prohibited to do something that will cause Chilul Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh, you also need to do whatever you can to minimize or prevent or avoid the need to be Mechal Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh. And to me, it all is the same principle, which is Rotzoin HaTorah. So the question is, what price and to what extent? So a few minutes ago I mentioned the question, is a woman supposed to go early to the hospital to prevent Chilul Shabbos, even though she still has time? In the middle of the week, she would sit at home for another 2 or 3 hours. And my psak is, she doesn't need to go early. What is that psak based on? So all the Achronim deal with the question, how much money does one need to spend to be Mekayim HaMitzvahs, to say? Kosav Aramo, Tov Reish Nun Vav, Ein Odom Chayav Lebazbez Hoina Aval HaMitzvahs. Person doesn't need to spend a fortune, a lot of money, to perform a mitzvah. How much does he need? This is a huge sugya. I can't go into it today. Minchas Osha Kloli HaMitzvahs. In recent years, that's the most popular of my sform. I hope the new one, the new set, will break that record. But up to now, the Minchas Osha Kloli HaMitzvahs, every time it's printed, in a week, it's off the shelves. And the Minchas Osha is a big discussion. How much money does one need to spend to buy a lulav, to buy a sukkah? And I wrote big chedushim on this sugya, which we don't have time to discuss today. But in Minchas Osha Bereishis Nun Ches, I think in the new edition, I asked, how much effort does one need to exert? How much suffering and hardship does one need to take upon himself to perform a mitzvah? Many years ago, I got a call from a faraway little town in Canada in the middle of the winter. And a person arrived there in the middle of a blizzard. And when he unpacks, he realizes to his horror that he forgot his tefillin at home. It was a snowstorm. We checked things out. The closest Chabad house was about 3 or 4 kilometers away, and there was no transportation, no cars, no buses. Does he need to trudge 3 or 4 kilometers in the middle of a snowstorm to put on tefillin? And I paskin, no, you don't need to. Sad, you're going to miss a day with tefillin. Tomorrow, sit an extra hour with your tefillin. So once again, my psak was always also based on an understanding of mitzvahs tefillin. And we don't have time for that today. I just want to bring an example. How much effort does one need to exert to be Mekayim a mitzvah? So it's easy to define how much money, because money is numbers. When we deal with numbers, we have percentage points. But we don't have a Richter scale of tercha. How could one define tercha? How many calories you're going to burn? The only source in Shas in which we deal with the concept of tercha is Daled Mil. How far do you need to walk? L'tfilo l'netilas yadayim, Chazal speak about Daled Mil. But even Daled Mil is only a partial answer. And I ask, Daled Mil for whom? For a marathon runner? For a young athletic who jogs 10 miles every day? For him, Daled Mil is nothing. Would the same halacha apply to an old man walking with a cane, or a person that has a medical issue and he's walking with crutches? A few months ago, I was on crutches a few months, and Baruch Hashem, no words to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm back to normal, without surgery, without medication. Haroifei chol basar, I'm afli to say thank Hashem. So, the din of Daled Mil, is that the same for everyone? Daled Mil uphill or straight? It's easier to walk a mile in flat terrain than walk 150 meters in a steep climb. Daled Mil in what weather? In a snowstorm? In a chamsin? Or in a beautiful spring day? So Daled Mil is also so general. How much Torah? But to me it is clear there's a limit to that Torah. And I'll give you an example. Yoredei Sheinayin Dalet Siv Zayin, there's a psak of the Ramo. Yoredei Sheinayin Dalet is Hilchas Avelis. And we're dealing with the concept of Meis Mitzvah. A Kohen cannot expose himself to Tumas Meis. That's the very first source we dealt with today, the Chasam Sofer. But a Meis Mitzvah is Doicha Tumas Kohenim. And if you find a dead man in the middle of the woods, no one is taking care of him. That's a Meis Mitzvah. And even a Kohen should be Metama Atzmai L'Kvoid HaMeis, Today, you find a body in the middle of the woods. Don't touch. You call the police and the condone of the area. They'll chase everyone away. Once upon a time, you find a body, you take care. Call the Chevra Kedisha. If no one else is there, it overrides Tumas Koyanim. But if other people are there that are not Koyanim, then the Koyan needs to step aside. So there are more rights. Nobody else volunteers to take care of the mace. But the Kohen could offer money to people, and then they'll be happy. For money, the Kohen is not mechuyev to do so. He doesn't need to spend his money to prevent a situation in which mace mitzvah overrides Tumas Koyanim. So Tumas Koyanim is not kores, but it's a diuraisa. Wouldn't be different than Chilul Shabbos. So 70 years ago, we find a fascinating machlokes and halacha between two gedolim. One was one of the Zkenim, the elders, and the other was a young Ilui. Reb Pinchas Epstein was the Gaivid of the Eidach Leidus Yerushalayim. And one of the outstanding young Ilui in Yerushalayim was Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So the electrical wires were torn, and there's a high voltage wire on the ground, which is skonas nefoshes. A child, a person, might step on that wire, touch the wire, and be electrocuted. He could die. Do we call Chevrat Chashmal to take care? Reb Pinchas Epstein said no. The first person that sees that, stand put, warn everybody to stay away. If anybody approaches the wire, push him away or tell him, why be Mechal Shabbos if you could take care of the problem without Chilul Shabbos? Reb Shlomo Zalman argued, no one individual is mechuyev to be mevatel oinig Shabbos, to stand in the middle of the street for 5 hours, heat and the cold and whatever it is, to prevent Chilul Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh. And Reb Shlomo Zalman argued his point from that halacha by Tumas Koyanim. Just like a Kohen doesn't need to pay $100 to hire someone to prevent Tumas Koyanim for a mace mitzvah, effort equals money. Money equals effort. So if it would be something minimal, it's a half hour before Rabbeinu Tam, yes, don't be Machal Shabbos. But there's a limit. Does a person need to stand in the middle of the street Shabbos instead of spending time with his family, learning in Meismedish, eating Suda Shabbos? There's a limit. How much effort does a person need to exert to prevent Chilul Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh? And I think Reb Shlomo Zalman was right. And it's a beautiful proof and raya from Shin Ayin Daled. And that is the source of my psak. A woman doesn't need to go to the hospital early and just hang around in the hall of the hospital without the minimum comfort. Yeshuva Daita of a Yoldas is very important. When Machal Shabbos for Yeshuva Daita, that is the opposite of Yeshuva Daita. So, in every situation, we to deal with the question, what effort, how much is demanded? So the story about the guy that arrived in Canada in the middle of a blizzard, walking hours in the snow, might even be a sakona, but even if it's not a sakona, you have a fur coat. It's a huge, huge effort, and it is above and beyond the call of duty. Just like Ein Odom L'chayv L'bazbaz Hoin Rav Mitzvahs, and Reb Shlomo Zalman argued a similar comparison between if a Kohen doesn't need to spend money to prevent Tumas Koyanim for Meis Mitzvah, there's a limit how much effort a person needs to exert to prevent Chilul Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh. So today we discussed the fascinating sugya, the fundamental question, is a person required to do whatever he can to prevent Chilul Shabbos for Pikuach Nefesh? We broadened the scope of this question and we dealt with similar halachas. So we started off with Lamdis, and we also touched upon a few fascinating shaylas, halacha l'mais. So this week is Parshas Yisro, Kabbalah Satayra Mamed Harsina v'yomer Hashem el Moshe, Alei Elei HaHoro, v'hayesham v'etna l'cho es luchas u'evan v'atoyre v'amitzvah shekosafti l'hoiroisam. Rashi writes, Luchos ksiv, without a vav, as if luchas, not luchois. Sheshteim Shabbos. There were two luchos, two tablets. Rashi writes they were totally similar. Similar in texture, similar in shape, in form, in size, in weight. Shteim Shabbos. And the source is Yerushalmi in Shkolim. Why is that? We need to understand why. Kosav Ramban beParshas HaShavua, in our Parsha, two luchos. Luch number one is Bein Adam L'Mokim. Luch number two is Tzorchei HaAdam, Bein Adam L'Chaveroi. And the Ramban explains in a way, Kabed Savicha V'Mechu is like Bein Adam L'Mokim. Father and mother are partners in the creation of every human being. They are shutfim of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, shutfim liyetzira. In many ways, Kabbalah Savicha V'Zamechu is fundamental to Torah Kol Torah Kula. Hishva Kvoidem L'Chvoid HaMokim. Father and mother hand down the transmission of Torah and of Yiddishkeit and of mitzvahs. I think we need to combine and put together Rashi and the Ramban. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu give two tablets and not one? I think because to stress the importance of the two fundamental realms of Torah's Hashem. Luach number one, Bein Adam L'Mokim. Luach number two, Bein Adam L'Chaveroi. Shavuos, Shteim Shavuos. Both are similar. To stress the fact that Bein Adam L'Mokim, Bein Adam L'Chaveroi, each is as important, fundamental, significant, essential as the other. We know many people that are so frum. Every chum in Hilchas Shabbos, every detail of boirer, they daven for hours. Netilas yadayim proteo v'digdokeo. But when it comes to Ben Adam L'Chaveroi, they're just not there. Nothing. On the other hand, there are some people who are so perfect in Ben Adam L'Chaveroi, compassionate, helpful, anshe chesed, decent people, with a total lack of yiras shamayim. Eila ve'eila are far from shleimus. The shleimus of Adam Yisrael is trying to perfect both different parts of Torah. Bein Adam L'Mokim and Bein Adam L'Chaveroi. Both are not only important, but essential. And you could achieve no level of shleimus without both of them. So a few different places in Torah we learn about Shviras HaLuchos. And the Pasuk says, V'yashlech miyodoi. The Messiah is yodoi. Without a yud, the mikra is yodov. And Rabbi Sol Salanter has a marvelous idea. Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from the mountain and he hears those horrific voices. Tupim v'macholis. He sees the Egel Azov, the golden calf. The tragic failure of Klal Yisrael. Aluva kalo shemezana tachas chupos. But Moshe Rabbeinu figures, it's obvious I can't give them luach number one. They failed the test even before they started. But why not give him luach number two? Sei a mensch, just be a decent human being. Lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, lo tignov, lo teed berecho, eid shoko, lo isach med eishtes reacho. So it's v'yashlech miyodoi. He thought I'm just going to drop one from my right hand, but still keep the other. Kodesh Baruch Hu says no. They're inseparable. The reason I gave you two luchos is not because you're going to throw away one, discard one, and hold the other. Two luchos teach us shteim shavuos. They come together. You can't separate Torah. If one goes, the other goes as well. V'yashlech miyodov. And that is an important lesson. The Rambam writes at the end of Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel, and that's a very vast halacha in Seifes Roim. And as we know, whenever the Rambam finishes a Sefer, a Mishnah Torah, he writes Divrei Musar, Divrei Machshava, Divrei Chasidus, and he writes, speaking about Shevet Levi, each and every Jew, from whichever tribe, could lock into Shevet Levi. V'areizen es kadosh kodesh kodeshim. What is required? What are the criteria? How could one be part of Shevet Levi? Lamed lefnei Hashem la'avdei l'shasa, which is avodah. L'deu es Hashem, which is Torah. Criteria number 3 is a surprise. Hoylach yosher kefi she'asahu hu Elokim, v'porech me'olav oylach heshbonos harabim asher bikshu lehem bnei ha'adam. Yashus, honesty, integrity. We always thought you need to be honest and you need to have integrity just to be a mensch. The Rambam teaches us. Goes far beyond that. You cannot achieve any level of kedusha if you're not straightforward and honest and if you lack integrity. Harezen es kadosh kodesh kodeshim only if holach yosher kefi she'asahu hu Elokim. Twice in Yerushalmi, Sanhedrin Nun Gimel, Avodah Zarah Yud Ches. Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Lama Nikro Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Shelo Nistakel B'milosoi Me'olam. That's Midas HaYesod. Nachum Ish Kodesh HaKodeshim. Kodesh HaKodeshim. Higher than Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Why? Lo Nistakel B'tzuras Madbeya Me'olam. Lo Nistakel B'tzuras Madbeya, and my understanding is, he wasn't a Roidev Betza. He wasn't a To'iv Betza. He was a Soine Betza. Money meant nothing to him. He was generous. He was giving. He was helpful. And he was honest in Gezel and Geneva in Ainoah. And that is how he achieved to be called Nachum Ish Kodesh HaKodesh. So this is one of the most important lessons. Shnei Luchos. One bein Adam l'chaveroi, one bein Adam l'makom, v'shteihem shavos, like Rashi writes. Yerotzen shiach alkenu emohim. Have a beautiful Shabbos, and we should be zocheh to be as Mashiach tzidkenu b'mheru v'yomeinu amen.